The galaxy was already tense when the first strange sign appeared near the outer rim. Trade ships reported missing convoys. Patrol teams found empty hulls drifting through space. Something powerful was moving in the dark, and no one understood why. Most governments believed it was the start of another quiet conflict between rival factions. But a few old commanders whispered a different fear. They said a legend was waking again, something forgotten and dangerous. They warned that if this legend returned, no empire would sleep in peace. At that time, no one believed such stories. No one imagined that the threat rising in the shadows was connected to a single human and a predator cub he once raised. Far from these growing worries, on a lonely research outpost near a pale blue moon, a small team worked in an old metal facility. The place looked harmless, almost peaceful. The workers there studied strange creatures, not weapons or war plans. They had no idea that the galaxy outside was changing. One of these workers, a young technician named Rylan, lived a quiet life. He preferred machines more than people. He liked fixing things, building tools, and researching life forms from different planets. His calm routine gave him comfort in a universe full of political storms. One cold morning, Rylan woke to an alarm echoing down the hallway. It was not a normal system alert. It was a distress signal from the outer observation dome. He ran through metal corridors, his boots striking against the floor as he tried to understand what could have gone wrong. When he reached the dome, he stopped in shock. A small escape pod had crashed inside the protective shield. The pod was damaged, burned, and nearly melted from atmospheric entry. It looked like someone had launched it in a hurry, maybe even in fear. Rylan opened the hatch carefully. Inside, wrapped in a thin, heated blanket, was a tiny creature. It had white fur with dark stripes, glowing blue eyes, and small, sharp claws. The cub looked frightened, but it was still alive. Rylan felt a strange pull in his chest. This was not a normal animal. Its eyes held intelligence, emotion, and something ancient. He had seen predator species in the lab before, but this one was different. It looked young, maybe newborn, yet somehow powerful. He lifted the cub gently. It let out a soft sound, almost like a question. Rylan tried to calm it, knowing that young predators were unpredictable. He carried it back to the lab while calling the others. But when the team scanned the cub, the results shocked everyone. The creature belonged to a species known only through rumors in old military logs. These logs described a race feared by entire armadas. They were called void claws, predators from deep space, known for their strength, speed, and near unstoppable nature. But everyone believed the void claws were extinct. Rylan began to understand why someone placed the cub inside an escape pod. Someone wanted it hidden. Someone wanted it to survive. Someone also wanted it far away from whoever was hunting it. The team sent the information to Central Command, expecting orders. But the reply never arrived. Instead, communication lines went silent. The outpost could not reach any nearby station. They tried all channels, all frequencies, but nothing changed. It felt like the galaxy had simply closed its doors and left them alone. Hours later, long-range sensors detected movement, unidentified ships, fast and silent, approaching their location. Their shapes did not match any known patrol group. The ships flew without Empire signatures. They did not announce their presence. They came with purpose, not curiosity. Rylan held the cub in his arms as the alarms began to ring again. He could feel the small heart beating quickly, as if it sensed the danger too. The team rushed around, trying to activate shields, send warnings, and prepare defenses. But their outpost was not built for war. They had no chance against unknown hunters. When the ships landed outside, the ground shook. Heavy footsteps approached the entrance. Rylan hid behind a metal table with the cub pressed against his chest. The lights flickered as the door opened. Dark figures stepped inside. Their armor was sharp, cold, and silent. They were not soldiers from any alliance he recognized. They looked like trackers, elite hunters. Their movements were slow and confident, like they already knew the cub was inside. Rylan looked at the tiny creature. Its eyes glowed brighter. For a moment, he wondered if the cub understood what was happening. He whispered softly, trying to calm it, but he knew the danger was real. He knew they would take the cub, and they might kill everyone who had seen it. He had never been brave. He had never fought a battle. But something inside him changed when he looked at the cub trembling in his arms. A strange feeling grew inside him. It felt like responsibility, or maybe destiny. He made a decision before he could stop himself. He picked up a small tool that looked like a metal scanner, but inside it held a high-voltage pulse. It was not a weapon, but it might distract the attackers. The hunters spread out in the room, checking corners, scanning heat signatures. Rylan waited until one stepped near him. Then he pressed the tool against the metal table and activated the pulse. A burst of blue light flashed across the room. The hunter's visor glitched for a second. That was all he needed. He ran. He ran through the hallway, the cub held tight as alarms blared overhead. The hunters shouted and followed him. Rylan reached the maintenance shaft and climbed inside, pulling the cover behind him. He slid through the narrow space, heart pounding, while the cub pressed closer to him, as if trusting him completely. For the first time in his life, Rylan felt like he was part of something bigger. He did not know why the cub was so important. He did not know who the hunters were, but he understood one thing clearly. He would not give the creature up. Not now. Not ever. Rylan moved through the narrow maintenance shaft with quick breaths, trying to stay silent. The metal walls vibrated faintly as the hunters searched the outpost. Their boots echoed through the corridors, slow and heavy, like they were in no hurry at all. They believed escape was impossible. They believed he was trapped. Rylan felt sweat on his hands as he held the cub close. The creature's fur brushed against his arm, warm and soft, but its glowing blue eyes stayed alert. It was frightened, yet calm in a strange way, almost as if it knew this was only the beginning of something much larger. Rylan slid down another section of the shaft until he reached a small service hatch. He opened it quietly and looked inside the storage room below. It was empty. Shelves lined the walls, and dim lights flickered overhead. He lowered himself down, holding the cub carefully. Once he landed, he placed the creature on a soft cloth while he checked the exits. The door to the hallway was locked, but he knew it would not stay locked for long. The hunters were scanning every room. They would eventually find this one too. He lifted the cub again, and the small creature pressed its head against his chest. That simple movement filled him with a strange courage. He did not know where to go, but he knew staying here meant death. He moved to the second exit, a small lift used for moving equipment. The lift connected to the lower tunnels, which stretched under the outpost and led toward the moon's rocky surface. If he could reach the outer caves, he might hide long enough to send another distress signal. Before leaving, he grabbed a small toolkit. He had no weapons, but he understood machines better than anything. Maybe he could create something useful along the way. The cub watched him gather tools, blinking slowly as if trying to understand. Rylan whispered, "We will survive. I promise." He was not used to speaking so boldly, but the words felt right. The lift descended with a soft hum. The air grew colder as they reached the lower tunnels. Dust covered the floor, and the walls were rough metal and stone mixed together. This area was not meant for travel, only maintenance. As Rylan stepped out, he heard distant rumbling from above. The hunters were spreading through the outpost. He walked faster, his steps quiet, his heart beating hard. The cub looked around with alert eyes, sensing the danger growing behind them. The tunnel forked into two paths. The left side led toward the power core. The right led toward the old cargo gates that opened into the caves. Rylan chose the right path, But before he took 3 steps, lights in the tunnel flickered. A strange humming sound filled the air. He stopped. Something activated nearby, a scanning beam. Blue light crawled across the walls like a slow wave. Rylan hurried behind a large metal container. The cub pressed against him as they crouched low. The scan passed by, humming deeply, searching for heat signatures or movement. Rylan held his breath. He felt the cub tremble slightly but remain quiet. The beam faded after a few seconds and moved away. He exhaled slowly, realizing how close they were to being found. He moved again, faster this time, pushing himself through the tunnels until the air changed. It became colder, thinner. They were near the cargo gates. Rylan approached the final door, but it was locked with a heavy electronic panel. He pulled out his toolkit, hoping he could bypass the system. His hands shook from exhaustion and fear, but he focused. The cub sat beside him, watching the wires and circuits with curious eyes. Rylan opened the panel and connected 2 wires together. Sparks flickered. The door made a low mechanical sound, but did not open. He adjusted another set of wires, trying to override the main control. The footsteps above grew louder. The hunters were coming. He could almost feel their presence like a cold wind creeping down the tunnels. The cub suddenly growled softly, but not in fear. It was warning him. Rylan muttered, "Please work," as he rewired the final connection. The control screen turned green. With a hiss of air, the door slid open. Cold wind rushed in from the caves outside. Snow particles floated through the air like tiny glowing lights. He picked up the cub and ran into the cave. The tunnels inside were wide, carved by ancient lava flows. The light from the outpost behind him faded as he moved deeper into the darkness. Strange blue crystals grew from the cave walls, casting a soft glow. Their light reflected in the cub's eyes, making them shine even brighter. Rylan walked deeper until he found a raised area with several large rocks where they could rest for a moment. He placed the cub down and caught his breath. His body felt weak, but he kept going. He knew this was only temporary safety. The hunters would not stop until they found the cub. He looked at the creature again. It stared at him with a calm, focused expression. Rylan realized something strange. Since he found the cub, everything in his life had changed. Fear, danger, escape, everything had come so fast, but he felt no regret. He felt a strange need to protect the creature, stronger than anything he had ever felt before. He wondered who sent the cub in the escape pod. Who was trying to hide it? Why were dangerous hunters searching for it? There were too many questions and no answers. But he felt sure of one thing. This was no ordinary cub. It was important, maybe even powerful, and someone feared what it would become. A distant echo came from the tunnel he used. The hunters were entering the caves. Rylan picked up the cub again. He moved deeper into the cavern, following the blue glow of the crystals. The air trembled with faint vibrations. He did not know what waited ahead, but he felt he had no choice. Every step he took, the cub stayed close, almost guiding him forward. The galaxy far above continued to fall into silent unease, unaware that a simple human and a small predator cub were walking together into the shadows. Unaware that this journey would change the future for everyone, and unaware that a legend was beginning to take shape. The deeper Rylan moved into the cave, the stranger the air became. It felt warm in some places and cold in others, as if the cave itself was alive and breathing. The walls were covered with glowing blue crystals, their light shifting slowly like moving water. The cub watched everything carefully, its ears twitching. Rylan felt a small comfort knowing the creature stayed close to him even in this strange place. Every time he slowed down, the cub touched his leg with its paw, as if telling him not to stop. He had never been in these caves before. The outpost workers always said the caves were unsafe and unstable. Some areas collapsed easily. Some were filled with toxic gases. But at that moment, Rylan preferred danger inside the cave over the hunters behind him. At least here he had a chance to hide. The hunters would search the tunnels, but they did not know these caves well. Rylan hoped the strange formations would confuse their scanners. As he walked, the ground began to slope downward. He slid a little and caught himself on a rock. The cub jumped lightly beside him with perfect balance. Rylan whispered, "You're better at this than me." The cub blinked, almost amused. He kept moving, but his legs were getting tired. He needed to stop soon, but he could already hear distant echoes from behind. The hunters were entering the cave network, spreading out slowly and carefully. Rylan pressed on until he reached a wide chamber. The ceiling arched high above him, filled with crystals that glowed brighter than the others. It felt like a hidden world beneath the surface. A faint airflow came from the far side, telling him there must be another exit somewhere deeper in the cave system. He was about to continue when the cub suddenly stopped. Its fur rose slightly, and its eyes focused on something far ahead in the darkness. Rylan followed its gaze. He could not see anything at first, but then he noticed a small flicker of light. It looked like a moving reflection. He stepped closer with caution. The cub kept its body low, ready to react. When Rylan reached the source of the light, he understood why the cub reacted. In the center of the chamber was a large stone platform, and on top of it sat a strange device. It looked ancient and advanced at the same time, made of dark metal with glowing lines running across its surface. It felt out of place in a natural cave. Rylan approached slowly. The cub jumped onto the platform and sniffed the device. The glowing lines brightened when the cub touched it. Rylan felt his breath catch. The machine was reacting to the cub, not to him. He placed his hand near the surface, and nothing happened. But when the cub stepped fully onto the platform, the entire device powered on with a soft pulse. Blue light filled the chamber. A hologram rose from the device, projecting a map of the galaxy. Rylan took a step back in shock. The hologram marked several locations with red symbols. The symbols looked like warning signs. The cub studied the map with eyes full of focus, as if it somehow understood what the projection was showing. Rylan whispered, "What are you?" But the cub only looked up at him with a quiet growl that sounded almost like a reply. He heard footsteps in the distance. The hunters were getting closer. He turned off the device by lifting the cub off the platform. The hologram faded instantly. Rylan knew they couldn't stay here. But he also knew this machine was important. Someone built it long ago. Someone expected the cub, or one of its kind, to find it. He carried the cub and moved toward the far exit. The ground rose again as he climbed a rocky slope. The cub looked back several times, sensing danger approaching. When Rylan reached the top of the slope, he saw a narrow passage. It was small enough to crawl through. The hunters would have trouble fitting inside. It was their best chance. He crawled into the passage, pulling the cub close to his chest. The rock scraped his arms, but he kept moving. Behind him, the echoes grew louder. He heard metallic voices speaking in a language he did not understand. Then he heard a sound that froze his blood. The hunters activated a drone. The hum of the machine grew louder with every second. It was small enough to enter the narrow passage. Rylan crawled faster. His breath became shorter. His hands shook as he pulled himself forward through the tight stone tunnel. The cub made a sharp sound, warning him again. When he looked back, he saw a faint red glow approaching. The drone was scanning the tunnel. If it found them, it would alert the hunters instantly. He reached the end of the passage and pushed out into another chamber. This chamber was different. It was darker, colder, and filled with strange patterns carved into the stone walls. The air felt heavy, as if the room held the weight of old secrets. He stood up quickly and looked for another exit, but the chamber was closed on all sides except the passage he came from. The drone's red glow slowly approached the opening. Rylan looked around and saw a small ledge near the ceiling. If he could get up there and pull the cub with him, the drone might miss them in the dark. He grabbed a rock and pulled himself up. The cub leaped beside him with surprising strength. Rylan held it close and pressed his body against the wall, trying to stay as still as possible. The drone entered the chamber. Its red light moved across the floor, scanning patterns and shapes. It hovered for several minutes. Rylan held his breath the entire time. The cub stayed silent, its eyes fixed on the machine. Finally, the drone turned around and flew back toward the passage. Rylan exhaled slowly. He felt weak from the fear and the climb, but he knew they were safe for only a moment. He had to find a way out of the cave system before the hunters returned. He jumped down from the ledge and began searching the walls. The cub ran ahead and stopped near one section of stone that looked smoother than the rest. Rylan touched the surface. It felt warm. When he pushed lightly, the stone moved. A hidden door slid open, revealing a dark corridor leading deeper into the unknown. Rylan held the cub and stepped forward. He had no idea that every step he took was leading him closer to the true purpose of the predator cub, and to a destiny that would soon change the entire galaxy. Rylan stepped carefully into the dark corridor, holding the cub close to his chest. The hidden passage felt older than the rest of the caves, as if it had been built long before the outpost existed. The floor was smooth stone, and faint lines of blue light ran along the walls, glowing like veins. The cub's eyes reflected the soft light, shining with a strange calmness. Rylan felt nervous, but he kept moving. He sensed they were getting closer to something important, though he didn't know what it was. The corridor stretched far ahead, curving gently downward. As Rylan walked, he noticed strange symbols carved into the walls. They looked ancient, maybe older than any language he knew. The cub stared at them with focus, almost like it recognized the shapes. Rylan whispered, "Do you understand this place?" The cub did not answer, but its tail flicked once, as if telling him to keep walking. After several minutes, the corridor opened into a massive chamber. The ceiling rose high overhead, lost in shadows. The blue crystals here were larger than any Rylan had seen before, glowing with deep and vibrant light. In the center of the chamber stood a tall, circular structure made of dark metal. It looked like a doorway, but it had no door, just an open arch filled with swirling blue mist. The air around it hummed quietly. Rylan froze, staring at the strange machine. He had never seen anything like it. It did not belong to human technology or any known alien design. It looked ancient and advanced at the same time, just like the device they found earlier. He stepped closer without realizing it. The cub jumped from his arms and walked toward the archway. As soon as it reached the edge of the mist, the blue glow brightened, and the hum deepened into a soft, powerful tone. Rylan's heart raced. The machine was reacting to the cub again. He watched as the mist shifted, forming faint shapes, almost like images. For a moment he saw a planet floating inside the mist, dark forests, mountains, and skies lit with bright stars. Then the image changed to a group of large predators, standing proudly on a rocky cliff. They looked like the cub, but grown, strong, and majestic. Their eyes glowed with the same blue brightness. Rylan stepped closer and whispered, "Is this your home?" The cub looked back at him with a soft growl. Rylan felt a sudden sadness. Had the cub been taken from its world? Was its species being hunted? Before he could think more, the humming sound changed. The machine reacted again, but this time not to the cub. Rylan heard footsteps approaching from the corridor behind him. The hunters had found the hidden passage. He turned quickly and saw their dark silhouettes entering the chamber. They moved with dangerous calmness, scanning the room with their glowing visors. Rylan backed away from the hunters, but they advanced slowly. The cub growled loudly now, standing between Rylan and the intruders. For a moment, The hunters stopped, almost as if they sensed the machine behind them. One pointed toward the archway and spoke in a low, metallic voice. Rylan didn't understand the words, but he understood the tone. They wanted the cub. They needed the cub for something. He felt fear tighten in his chest. The hunters spread out, trying to trap them from both sides. Rylan looked at the swirling mist of the archway and made a quick decision. He grabbed the cub and ran toward the machine. The hunters shouted and fired a shot. A bolt of energy hit the ground near his foot, sending sparks across the chamber. The cub twisted in his arms and looked at the mist. Rylan hesitated for only a moment, then stepped into the arch. The world dissolved around him. He felt a strange pull, like being stretched across space. Blue light wrapped around him. The cub pressed tightly against his chest. For a moment, he could not breathe. Then everything shifted. His body felt light, then heavy, then still again. When the light faded, Rylan was no longer in the cave. He stood inside a vast open plain under a sky filled with swirling stars. The air smelled clean and cold. Tall black trees swayed in the distance. Mountains rose like sharp shadows far away. The ground beneath him was covered in soft, dark grass that glowed faintly with blue lines, just like the crystals in the cave. He slowly lowered the cub to the ground. The creature walked forward, sniffing the air with deep familiarity. Its eyes brightened. This was its world. This was where it belonged. Rylan looked around. "Did that machine send us here?" he said quietly. The cub turned and nudged his leg as if confirming it, but the moment of peace didn't last long. Behind him, the air cracked with a sharp sound. A flash of red light appeared for a second. The hunters were trying to activate the portal. Rylan realized they could follow him. He looked at the cub urgently. "We need to move." He ran across the open grass, following the cub, who moved quickly with natural confidence. The sky above them shimmered with strange light, as if reacting to their presence. Rylan kept looking back, expecting the hunters to appear at any moment. They reached a hill covered with glowing plants. The cub climbed easily, stopping at the top to look down at the valley below. Rylan climbed after it and gasped at the sight. A massive ruined structure sat in the valley. It looked like a fortress built of dark stone and metal. Broken towers leaned at strange angles. Huge claw marks covered the walls, as if a battle long ago had torn the place apart. Blue flames flickered inside the ruins, lighting the shattered stones. Rylan whispered, "What happened here?" The cub stared at the ruins with a deep, sad expression, almost like it remembered something painful. The wind blew softly, carrying a distant sound, like a howl, long and low. The cub answered with a small roar. Rylan froze. The sound in the wind repeated. This time it was louder. Something else lived here. Something strong. Something part of the cub's past. He had no idea what awaited them in the ruins, but he knew they had to go there. Answers were waiting. Truth was waiting. And whatever lived in that valley had heard the cub's call. Rylan felt the ground tremble. He was no longer alone with the cub on a quiet alien world. Something old was waking, and it was coming toward them. The ground shook again, stronger this time, making loose stones roll down the hillside. Rylan placed one hand on the ground to steady himself while the cub stood tall beside him, staring straight toward the valley. The ruined fortress below seemed to pulse with light, as if answering the tremors. Blue flames flickered brighter along the broken walls, moving like living shadows. Rylan could feel the energy in the air, thick and electric, almost pulling him downward. He looked at the cub. Its body was tense, fur raised slightly, eyes glowing brighter than before. Rylan whispered, "Is something coming?" The cub made a low sound, almost like a warning but also like recognition. Rylan didn't know how to describe it. The creature wasn't afraid. It seemed ready. Another tremor rolled under their feet. Birds, dark shapes with long wings, flew out of the trees below, scattering across the glowing sky. Rylan watched them vanish into the distance before taking a deep breath. He knew they couldn't stay on the hill much longer. Whatever lived in that valley had heard the cub, and it was responding. Rylan began moving down the slope, carefully stepping over rocks while the cub walked ahead with surprising confidence. The air grew warmer the closer they came to the ruins. Strange symbols carved into the fallen stone walls glowed soft blue, just like the crystals in the cave. Rylan reached out and touched one of the symbols. The stone felt warm, almost alive, as if energy was pulsing through it. The cub moved faster now, heading straight toward the largest broken tower. Rylan followed, though he felt unease growing inside him. He looked around and imagined the fortress long ago. Tall walls, proud towers, and a strong, united species living here. Now it was silent, broken, and filled with strange echoes. He wondered what kind of war had destroyed it and what the cub's people had faced. As they approached the tower, Rylan heard a low growl, not from the cub, but from deeper inside the ruins. He froze. The cub walked forward slowly, not afraid, but alert. Rylan crouched behind a cracked pillar, trying to see what was making the sound. The air shimmered near the tower entrance, and dark dust swirled around a massive shape moving forward. Rylan felt his heart jump as a large creature stepped into the open light. It looked like a grown version of the cub. White fur, dark stripes, glowing blue eyes, but much larger. Its body was powerful, almost twice the height of a human. Its claws dug into the ground as it walked, and its gaze was fixed on the cub. Rylan whispered, "Is that your family?" The cub moved closer, making a soft sound. The larger creature paused, staring at the cub with eyes full of emotion. It lowered its head almost gently. For a moment, Rylan thought it was peaceful, but then the air split with a loud crack. Red light burst from the sky. A shockwave hit the ruins, shaking the ground violently. Rylan looked up in terror. A portal had formed high above the fortress, glowing with harsh red light. The hunters had followed them through the machine. Their ships screamed through the sky like metal predators, engines burning as they descended toward the valley. The large creature roared, shaking the stones around it. It turned its glowing eyes toward the ships, anger rising like fire. The cub growled beside Rylan, mirroring the same emotion. Rylan grabbed the cub, pulling it close. "We need to move!" The large creature ran toward the valley, sprinting with incredible speed. It leaped onto a broken wall and climbed upward with powerful jumps. Rylan followed behind, trying to stay out of open sight. The first hunter ship fired a bolt of red energy at the ground. The explosion sent rocks flying everywhere. Rylan covered the cub with his body as dust and debris rained down around them. He felt the cub wiggle, trying to move. It climbed onto a rock and stared at the descending ships, its eyes glowing brighter than ever. Rylan feared the cub might charge at them, so he held it back. "No, you can't fight them alone." The larger creature reached the highest point of the tower. It opened its jaws and released a roar so powerful that the air burst outward like a wave. Blue energy shot from its mouth, striking one of the ships. The impact crackled with light, and the ship spiraled out of control before crashing into the valley floor. The ground shook again with the force of the explosion. Rylan stared in shock. The creature had abilities he never imagined. It was more than a predator. It was a force of nature. The cub looked up at him as if telling him it would grow into something just as strong one day. Rylan felt a strange pride at the thought, mixed with fear. 2 more ships circled the fortress, sending down squads of hunters. They landed silently, spreading out and moving with dark purpose. They aimed their weapons at the large creature on the tower. Blue energy flickered along its fur as it prepared to attack again. Rylan held the cub tightly and whispered, "We can't stay here. We need to find shelter." He looked around and spotted a crack in the side of the tower, large enough to crawl inside but too small for the hunters. He rushed toward it, pushing the cub inside first. Once inside, he found a narrow tunnel running deep into the stone. He followed it, hearing the sounds of battle behind him. The roar of the large creature echoed through the walls, mixed with the harsh blasts of hunter weapons. Dust fell from the ceiling as impacts shook the fortress. The cub stopped suddenly in the tunnel, staring at a glowing pool of blue liquid ahead. The pool rippled gently, lighting the chamber with soft brilliance. Rylan knelt beside it. The liquid looked almost like energy in physical form. He touched the ground near it and felt warmth spreading through the stone. The cub dipped its paw into the pool. The liquid glowed brighter. Suddenly, symbols on the tunnel walls ignited with light. Rylan stepped back as the entire chamber awakened. He saw images appear on the glowing stone, visions of battles, of void claws fighting enemies with deadly power, of worlds falling and rising. But one vision repeated more than the others. A small cub standing beside a human. Rylan felt cold inside. Somehow, this was part of the cub's destiny, part of his own destiny as well. The ground above shook loudly. The larger creature roared again, but the sound weakened. Rylan realized the hunters were overwhelming it. The cub looked at Rylan with deep, glowing eyes. It was time to face what waited outside, and Rylan knew he could not run anymore. Rylan felt the chamber tremble again as the battle above grew more violent. Dust drifted from the ceiling, and faint blue ripples moved across the glowing liquid in the pool. The cub stood beside him, staring at the shifting visions on the stone walls. Its eyes were wide, but not with fear. They held understanding. It seemed the cub finally recognized the truth of this place. Rylan watched the images too, feeling a deep pull in his chest. He saw an ancient war, one that stretched across stars. The Voidclaw species once defended entire regions of the galaxy, using their power to protect weaker worlds. But something dark rose against them, a force that feared their strength, a force that wanted them extinct. That same force now hunted the cub. Rylan whispered, "They destroyed your home." The cub looked at him, and he could feel the sadness in its eyes. But the visions did not end with destruction. Another image appeared, a young member of the Void Claws standing beside a human. They were side by side, not as enemies but as partners. Together they fought, and together they won battles that would have been impossible alone. Rylan did not understand how humans were part of this ancient story, but the message was clear. Humans and Void Claws were meant to stand together. The cub touched Rylan's hand with its paw. The simple gesture told him that their bond was not an accident. It was something written long before he was born, something the galaxy had forgotten, something powerful enough to threaten those who wanted control. Another loud explosion shook the fortress. The large Void Claw above was struggling to survive. Rylan knew it could not hold off the hunters forever. He stood up quickly and lifted the cub. "We need to go. It needs our help." The cub growled softly in agreement. They ran through the tunnel, following the path back toward the crack in the tower wall. The sounds of battle grew louder with each step. When Rylan reached the opening, he peered outside. The large Void Claw was lying on the broken stone ground, breathing heavily. Energy burns covered its fur. Several hunters surrounded it, their weapons pointed at its heart. More ships circled overhead, ready to finish the job. Rylan felt panic rush through him. He looked at the cub in his arms. The small creature stared at the wounded adult, then at the hunters. Its eyes glowed with fierce brightness. Rylan could feel energy building around it like a quiet storm. He whispered, "Are you sure?" The cub nodded. Rylan stepped out into the open and shouted loudly to distract the hunters. "Hey!" The sound echoed across the ruins. The hunters turned toward him instantly. One lifted a weapon and aimed directly at him. Rylan froze, but the cub leaped from his arms before the hunter could fire. A blast of blue light shot from the cub's small body. It hit the ground with a heavy crack, sending a shockwave across the ruins. The hunters stumbled backward, struggling to keep their balance. The cub stood between Rylan and the hunters, its fur glowing with bright blue energy. The hunters quickly adjusted their aim toward the cub, but something unexpected happened. The large void claw, though wounded, lifted its head and roared with its remaining strength. The roar carried strength, pain, and power. It filled the entire valley, shaking dust and loose stones from the ruins. The cub answered with its own roar, higher, sharper, yet filled with surprising force. Blue energy surged from both creatures. Rylan stepped back as the air lit up with crackling light. The energy formed a barrier around the cub and the large void claw. The hunters fired their weapons, but the blue barrier absorbed every shot effortlessly. The hunters hesitated. They had never seen this kind of power from a young void claw. They had expected a small creature, easy to capture. But this cub was different. One hunter yelled in panic. Another signaled the ships above to fire. Red beams shot down from the sky. The beams struck the barrier and bent away, splitting into harmless sparks. The cub's roar grew stronger. The ground beneath it cracked with glowing lines. Rylan watched with wide eyes, stunned by what was happening. The cub was awakening its true power. The adult void claw struggled to stand. It placed one paw beside the cub and looked at Rylan. Its eyes softened, filled with gratitude. Rylan felt tears forming. Somehow he knew this was its way of thanking him for protecting the cub when it was alone. The cub looked up at the larger creature. Their energy connected, forming a bright pulse that grew stronger with every second. Rylan saw the hunters trying to retreat, but it was too late. The energy burst outward with a deep, echoing shockwave. When the light faded, the hunters were gone. Their ships were destroyed. Only pieces remained, scattered across the valley like broken metal leaves. The air was quiet again, except for the soft wind moving through the glowing grass. Rylan looked at the cub, now standing calmly beside its guardian. The adult void claw lowered its head to the cub, touching their foreheads together. Then it looked at Rylan again. Rylan understood the message. The cub was safe now, because of him. The cub walked back to Rylan and pressed its head against his chest. Rylan held it close, knowing this was goodbye. The large void claw approached and gently lifted the cub with its mouth, placing it on its back. The cub looked down at Rylan, its glowing eyes soft. Rylan smiled sadly. "You'll grow strong. Strong enough to change everything." The large void claw roared, calling others. In the distance, shadows moved, more survivors of the species, awakened by the cub's power. Rylan watched as they gathered around the adult and the cub. For the first time in many years, their species had hope again. The cub raised its paw toward Rylan. Rylan raised his hand in return. A silent promise passed between them. They would meet again one day. When that day came, the galaxy would tremble once more. The void claws disappeared into the glowing forests, their blue light fading into the horizon. Rylan stood alone in the ruins, but he did not feel empty. He knew he had been part of something ancient and powerful, a story that would spread across planets. A legend that would warn empires, a truth that would not be forgotten. A human had raised a predator cub, and the entire galaxy would remember it forever.